Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Juvenile Instructor from the 15th of April 1901, and this is a continuation of the Lives of Our Leaders series, and this one is entitled Lives of Our Leaders, the First Council of the 70, President Seymour B. Young. Now, I'm going to be really honest, I don't know very much about any of the presidency of the 70s. So, I'm not going to pretend that I do. These will all be surprises to me, and I hope that it will be interesting, therefore, for you as well. But back then, before, I think it was 1976, before then, anybody called to the presidency of the 70, also called the First Council of the 70, don't get confused, was called for life, kind of like the apostles were. And so many of them served for years and years, easily as long as the apostles did. And I believe that was the case with Seymour B. Young. So he was the president of the presidency of the 70 at the time. After Joseph Young was president for a very long time, and I don't know if there was one in between. There probably was, before Seymour B. Young became president of the presidency of the 70. So let's take a look. The subject of this sketch, Dr. Seymour B. Young, was born October 3rd, 1837. 1837. So at this time, he was 64, 1901. In the town of Kirtland, Lake County, Ohio, his father being President Joseph Young, an elder brother of President Brigham Young, and his mother, Sister Jane A. Bicknell Young. He was carried through a rain of bullets in his mother's arms at the massacre of Haun's Mill in Missouri, 1838. Wow. Gosh. Yeah, Haun's Mill was horrible. In case you didn't know, a big mob showed up, and Saints were warned to leave. But they had this idea that, hey, look, we have this big building with this really thick wall that has chinks in it so that we can shoot out of it. And that will be safe enough if anybody comes for us. We feel safe with this nice, big, chunky building. The problem was that they did not expect is that the people who were hiding in this building, that the mob would just come up to the building directly and put their weapons into those chinks and shoot back. They weren't expecting that. So a lot of people were killed at Haun's Mill. It was considered kind of a massacre. The men were mostly in that building as well, and the women and children fled into the forest, which was relatively safe because it was easy to find hiding places, but it wasn't really safe. I mean, if they had gone running through the bushes and trying to find the people, they would have found them. Yeah, they weren't that well hidden. But luckily they did not. So I didn't know he was involved in Haun's Mill. Joseph Young, as I just mentioned, was Brigham Young's older brother, and he was also one of the first presidents of the 70s, and he was considered like the senior for a really long time. It's interesting that his son also was Seymour B. Young. So, all right. He came to Nauvoo, the beautiful city founded by the prophet Joseph Smith in 1839 at age 2, and remained in that city until June 1946, when, with his father's family, he started for the West at age 9. During his stay in Nauvoo, the suppression of the Nauvoo expositor occurred by order of the mayor and city council of that city. The prophet Joseph was tried with others of his brethren for riot in destroying this paper, first before Esquire Daniel H. Wells, and by him acquitted, but the enemies of the saints insisted that the trial should take place in the city of Carthage, and according to the prophet Joseph and his brother Hiram, started for that place June 24th, 1844. Brother Seymour well remembers being lifted up in the arms of his mother to obtain a view of these illustrious men as they passed some 50 rods away on the road to their martyrdom. Wow, so he distinctly remembers seeing them. 1844, he was 7? Yeah. On the morning of June 28th, at 5 o'clock, their neighbor, the late President Jacob Gates, awakened his mother and her family of little children and told them that the prophet Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram had been cruelly murdered the evening before at Carthage jail. The writer well remembers the sorrow of the Latter-day Saints at the awful event, and the scenes of grief at the funeral and burial of these two great leaders of Latter-day Israel. During the month of February 1846, Presidents Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball and others, with their families, left the city of Nauvoo, crossed the Mississippi River on the ice, by which it may be known that these poor exiles had no summer picnic, and started west, bidding adieu to their loved city and temple, well knowing that they would never see them again. Yeah. Ah, the Exodus, that was a rough time, yeah? As soon as his father could complete his arrangements, which was not until the 13th of June following, he, with his family, took up their line of march toward the setting sun, arriving at winter quarters late in the fall, and there overtaking President Young and brethren who had preceded them in the month of February. Yeah, it's interesting, right? So, Brigham Young left just across the Missouri River from Nauvoo to the other side of the state to winter quarters in February, and the people who left in June caught up with them. Now, the reason was because the conditions were so horrible. They had unseasonably heavy rains. They were literally wading through mud. So as soon as the roads dried, and well, they weren't many roads, but the trails dried, and they were able to go through normally, relatively, then it only took them a couple weeks. What took the other group months to get through. So that's why they caught up with them. Here the Saints remained until the following spring, 1847, when President Young and his pioneer band came to the Salt Lake Valley. Brother Young's father and family, not having the means necessary to emigrate with the pioneers of 1847, and not obtaining sufficient until 3 years later, remained in winter quarters until the spring of 1848, when the rest of the people who were unable to take up their journey to the mountains recrossed the Missouri River into the state of Iowa, for winter quarters was then an Indian territory and reservation, and hence the Saints were compelled to vacate this temporary abiding place and seek new homes in the state of Iowa. During the stay of his father's family for the 3 intervening years, Brother Young gained his first experience as a cowboy, and like others of his brethren was exposed to the raids of hostile Indians and white cattle thieves. About the middle of June, his father's family bid goodbye to their home in Pottawatomie County, Iowa, and started for Salt Lake Valley. On the Platte River, the camp was stricken with the terrible scourge, the Asiatic cholera. Why is it Asiatic? Did it come from Asia? It might have. I don't know. And within 24 hours, 2 of the strongest men lay dead before the scythe of this dreadful reaper, and a third man was down writhing and screaming with pain from the awful spasm and cramps of the disease. And that sounds awful. I am so glad I've never had cholera, and I hope I never have it. Gosh. At this time was witnessed the power of God in restoring this third victim of the disease, for by his request President Joseph Young administered to him, and he was instantly healed. The family arrived in Salt Lake City September 29, 1850, and were warmly welcomed by President Young and his brethren who had preceded them 3 years before. In the fall of 1854, Brother Seymour B. went with a party of men sent out by President Brigham Young under the direction of Elder Bryant Stringham, and settled Cache Valley. He helped to build the first house and establish the first colony in that region. In 1857, President Young called 72 missionaries for Europe, the United States, and Canada, with the request that this company of missionaries should travel with hand carts from Salt Lake City to the Missouri River. This they did, not having any teams or wagons in the company, but drawing their carts, laden with their provisions, bedding, etc., over the mountains and across the plains to old winter quarters, now Florence, Nebraska, a distance of 1,050 miles. Brother Seymour B. was one of these missionaries, indeed, the youngest member of the company. Interesting. So what they were trying to do was to prove that it could be done. Can you cross the plains pulling a handcart? Or do we really need all the animals that we have been shuffling back and forth? Because that was really difficult. That took a lot of effort to bring the wagons. But the handcarts were a lot smaller and lighter and easier to make, and they could bring more people with a less amount of money. So that was their idea. Hey, let's try the handcarts. And, well, it worked, sort of. So these missionaries were then proving that it could work. It can work, as long as the weather's not too terrible, basically, is the answer. Brother Young proceeded with others to Great Britain, where he labored as a missionary in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire until the spring of 1858, when he, with other missionaries, was called home on account of the Mormon or Utah War, instituted by James Buchanan, then President of the United States, who sent 3,000 United States soldiers under Colonel A.S. Johnston to destroy the Mormons. Yeah, this is a pretty well-known thing. I have mentioned it several times. So the short version is that the U.S. government thought that the Mormons were setting up an insurrection, and they sent the army to go subdue them. They called this the Mormon War or the Utah War, and they never had a full-on battle. I was going to say there wasn't shots fired, but I think there was, but like there wasn't a full-on battle at any time. Not a lot of people were killed. It wasn't like a major thing. It was kind of a minor thing. So, but it was pretty scary for a lot of people for a while, and they were afraid of what would happen, what could happen, and at that time they called all of the missionaries home. So, including Seymour B. Young. In 1862, President Abraham Lincoln telegraphed to President Brigham Young to furnish a battalion of 105 men to enlist as United States soldiers in the service of the United States, to be sent east on the plains to protect the overland mail and telegraph lines between the Missouri River on the east and San Francisco on the west. Oh, yeah. I was going to say I don't remember this, but I think I have vaguely heard of this. Yeah. To the telegraph lines. Like, I was like, wait, did they have to send soldiers to fight in the Civil War? No. They don't care about the Civil War. Like, so they don't need more soldiers necessarily for the Civil War. The question would also be raised, which side would they fight on, since they were neither north nor south over there in the west. But, yeah. But if they were just there to protect the telegraph lines so that they could communicate with California, that makes more sense. Elder Young was in this battalion and remained in the service until March 1863, when the company was honorably discharged and paid in greenbacks at par, when they were only worth 40 cents on the dollar. Nice. Okay, when the Black Hawk War broke out in Sanpete County and on the Sevier River, President Young sent many small companies to assist the brethren and protect them from the rifle and scalping knife of the Indians. The subject of this sketch was in the service during 1866. Wow, he was quite a military dude then. Sounds like he was all over the place. Okay, in 1868 he engaged in railroad building, working on contract of Brigham Young Jr. and George Chrisman, in procuring ties and bridge timber for the Union Pacific Railroad Company. In 1869 he contracted with the Utah Central Railway Company and built a mile of grade and furnished ties therefore. It is lying near the hot springs north of Salt Lake City. So he laid them himself? Is that what I understood? Or he just supplied them with supplies? Either way, he was involved in building the railroad, yeah? The following fall found him near the point of the mountains in Utah County, engaged in another contract for the Utah Southern Railroad, as it was then called. This contract was finished in 1869, and in 1870 he was called by President Brigham Young to take a second mission to Great Britain, this time to accompany his father, the late President Joseph Young, to that field of labor, in conformity with a prediction made to him by the prophet Joseph Smith at the time that elders Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball were called to their first mission to England, that at some time in the future Brother Joseph Young should take a mission to Great Britain. Oh, okay, so it was, I was about to say, because wasn't Seymour B. Young like a tiny child? He was 7 when Joseph Smith was martyred, so I feel like, that's why it suddenly surprised me. I was like, wait, Joseph Smith predicted what? And then it was like, oh, about Joseph Young, about his father. Okay, that's a different thing. Yeah. Okay. This visit to the British mission occupied about 6 months, and during their absence, the conferences throughout England and Scotland were visited, and visits were also made through portions of New York State and Ohio. Brother Joseph Young visiting relatives and the familiar places of many years previous. In 1871, after having studied the theory and practice of medicine and surgery for 10 years, with Dr. W.F. Anderson first, and then with Doctors Benedict, I think that's a typo, I think it should say doctor, because Doctors Benedict, unless there were 2 people named Benedict, I guess maybe. He matriculated in October of that year at the University Medical College of New York, and in March 1874, received his diploma as a medical and surgical graduate of that famous institution. Congratulations. Yeah. He returned home early in the spring of 1874, hung out his sign of MD in front of the old 70s Hall on State Street, on the spot where the new building of the Co-op Wagon and Machine Company now stands. Soon after, he became quarantine and city physician of Salt Lake City. Quarantine physician? Is that a thing? Apparently it's a thing, and a little later, by invitation of President Brigham Young, became his physician and medical advisor, which position was held by him until the President Young's death on August 29, 1877. Wow, that surprises me. The reason why is because Brigham Young was quite vocal about being anti-doctor. Like, he didn't think much of doctors. He must have thought something of him, or his own health was failing enough that he needed more help than he needed before. I don't know which one, maybe both. Wow, personal physician to President Brigham Young. Like, imagine that. Crazy. You know, it just reminds me of our current president of the church, who was the cardiologist of Spencer W. Kimball. Yeah? So, it just reminds me of that. Interesting. He continued in active practice as surgeon and physician until 1882. On October 14th of that year, he was called by revelation through President John Taylor to be one of the 7 presidents of the 70s, and in the 11 years from that time, by reason of the death or promotion to the Council of the Apostles of his seniors in that quorum, he became, in 1893, the senior president of that council. Since his call to this responsible position, his time has been spent visiting as a teacher and missionary nearly all of the stakes of Zion, generally in company with some of the 12, and occasionally with the First Presidency, and sometimes alone, going far and near to the conferences of which he has been appointed by his presiding officers. Of these visits, often ministering to the sick, the wounded, and the afflicted, not only in the ordinances of the gospel, but surgically and medically, bringing relief to numerous sufferers, to which many have testified. In connection with the above-named labors, he was called some 2 years ago to be an aide to the Deseret Sunday School Union Board, and finally, a few months since, to be a member of that board. Okay, not sure why they mentioned that, but interesting. It's okay. Okay, so let me just summarize really quick, and then we'll do some fact-checking. Okay, Seymour B. Young had a lot of calls that were kind of military-related. Yeah? He had seen some violence as a child and lived through the expulsion from Illinois. And his father was presidency of the 70, and he served a lot in the military, did some work in the railroad, eventually decided to become a doctor, served a couple missions in between, so it broke up his studies, and eventually finished his medical degree. It sounded like he was an apprentice at first, like apprentice to a doctor, and then it was broken up by missions, and then eventually he decided to enroll in medical school. He became a doctor, set up his practice as a physician, became the personal physician to President Brigham Young, continued to work as a physician, and then was called to the presidency of the 70. And it emphasizes that one of the major things he did was ministering to the sick, wounded, and afflicted. So he was still using his medical training. Yeah. I think that's kind of cool. Like, I mean, if that's what I understand anyway. So there's a military element, there's a medical element, and let us see if we missed anything. Yeah. Seymour B. Young. So, Wikipedia, don't fail me now. Okay, Seymour Bicknell Young Sr. Apparently he named his son after himself. That happens a lot. October 3, 1837 to December 15, 1924. So he lived quite a while after this until his eventual death, which was, relatively late, aged 87. Yeah, for the time, that was really quite old. Was a general authority of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from 1882 until his death. So this is a nice short article, so let's just read it. Young was born to Latter-day Saint converts Joseph Young and Jane A. Bicknell in Kirtland, Ohio. His uncle was Latter-day Saint Apostle Brigham Young. As an infant, Seymour Young was present with his mother at the Hans Mill Massacre. He moved with his family to Nauvoo in 1839 and then to Salt Lake Valley as Mormon pioneers in 1850. Yeah, they said he stayed for 3 years, yeah. From 1857 to 1858, Young served as a Mormon missionary in England, working primarily in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire. He was called home to Utah Territory prematurely because of the Utah War. In 1870 and 1871, Young accompanied his father on a mission to England and Scotland. The two also preached in and visited relatives in Ohio and New York. In 1874, Young graduated with a medical degree from University Medical College in New York City. Shortly thereafter, he began practicing medicine in Salt Lake City. Yep. In 1882, Young became a member of the first 7 presidents of the 70. He became the senior president of the 7-man council in 1892 and retained this position until his death. He also became a member of the general board of the Deseret Sunday School Union. Wow, they mentioned every one of these things. On October 9, 1884, Young became one of the last individuals added to the church's council of 50. Young practiced plural marriage and was married to 2 wives and was the father of 13 children, which they did not mention. Young died of nephritis in Salt Lake City, Utah. That is kidney failure. Wow. I'm kind of impressed with how incredibly accurate this is. Like, it was spot on. There wasn't a single thing missing except for his death. Yeah? And the Council of 50 stuff, which I don't think is relevant. Yeah, then they mentioned he had been married twice and had 13 children, which they did not mention in the actual article we just read. But other than that, and then obviously his death, which hadn't occurred yet when they wrote the article. So I'm really impressed with how much detail is in this, considering it's a very short, dense article. So they hit all the high points. They didn't mention his military service, though. Other than that, yeah, it sounds like everything was accurate, correct. So, well done. Awesome. I'm impressed with how accurate these are, actually. They're quite spot on. So what are my thoughts on Seymour B. Young? I would say he sounds like a very upright and straightforward person. Like, he doesn't beat around the bush. He doesn't try to hide things. He just does his thing, yeah? He does what he feels is right, the right thing to do at the time. And I feel like that's the only conclusion I can come to from someone who served in the military and then served missions and then became a physician. I feel like that kind of a course is one that would only come from someone who is a very honest and straightforward person and doesn't try to hide anything, because they do what they think is right. Yeah, so that's the kind of person who would do that. So I have to say that's pretty admirable. Interesting that he became the president of this presidency of the 70, as well as his father, Joseph Young, who was there for years and years. So anyway, I found that really interesting, and I hope you did too. If you did, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.